I told him I didn't feel later now. Let's go. We are incredibly grateful to welcome Bob Kealing to share his expertise with us this evening. I'd like to ask Professor Mike Denver to come out. And anytime you introduce Professor Denver, it's so important to remember all that he has built through this lecture series. And we are incredibly grateful for the intellectual institution that it has become in the community of Lakeland. Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you, President Martin. I need to adjust the microphone down a little bit. Anyway, thank you for being with us tonight, President Martin. It's really great to be with us. And we've got a really special program tonight. Again, my name is Mike Denham, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to our October edition of the Florida Lecture Series, produced by the Wild Child Center for Florida History. If you're with us for the first time, welcome. And I want to give you a special welcome and invite you to get a lecture series brochure if you don't have one out in the lobby. And my colleague Charles Fanning and my secretary Dee are out there assisting. So tell them hello. And if you're not on our mailing list, certainly sign up to get mailings. And we have a big mailing for every series of the year. And we'd love to have you connect with it. Over the years, we've been blessed with wonderful financial support from members of the community. And I want to give a special thank you to all of you who have donated to our efforts this year and in the past. Donations are what we need to keep the program free and open to the public. First, I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsor tonight, and that is Historic Lakeland Incorporated. Many of you are familiar with Historic Lakeland Incorporated, and they are sponsoring the event tonight. HLI was founded in 1979 as an organization to promote the appreciation of Lakeland's unique architectural heritage through awareness and engagement. HLI promotes preservation through education and awareness, and has had a large part in making our city so beautiful. Many of you who've been here for quite some time understand all the preservation work that has been done over the years. Historic Lakeland has had a hand in saving the Francis Langford Lake Mirror Promenade, the Terrace Hotel downtown, the Lake Mirror Tower Apartments, and the old federal building, which many people enjoy going to visit Mojo's Federal Barbecue. And the old Lakeland High School was also restored, which is now, of course, Lakeland Wild Child Middle School. It's a great organization, and I hope all of you will learn more about the organization by checking our website, historiclakeland.org, or Facebook page, or you can join us by grabbing an envelope outside. There are membership applications outside, and send us your membership. And we're delighted to be able to recognize Historic Lakeland tonight. Is some our Historic Lakeland board members in the audience? Natalie Oldecamp and Jim Edwards, can you be recognized? And John White, can you be recognized? And I'm not sure who else is with us. I'm sorry if I'm missing somebody. Before I introduce tonight's special guest, I want to say a few things about our upcoming program. Next month, on November 6th, across the pavilion, we'll welcome English professor Joy Castro from the University of Nebraska, who will join us in Branson 202 across the way. And again, that'll be November 6th. Dr. Castro will offer a glimpse of early 20th century Cuban community in Key West. Very vibrant community centered in large part around cigar industry. And her grandfather was a vibrant part of that community as a writer, editor, and newspaper editor. And she has discovered his writings and has actually published a wonderful book of some of his writings. She'll be with us on November 6th. We're really excited to be able to have her here a couple of sponsoring this program because tonight's guest, Bob Kealing, is a dedicated preservationist as well as being a writer and public official. He has done much to bring public attention to preserve many historic sites important to Florida's musical history and literary history, having founded the Florida Heritage Site honoring cultural legend Graham Parsons, Jack Kerouac, the Allman Brothers Band, and also Leonard Skinner. Many of you in this room have been to Dairy Dam, of course, which is located in Winter Haven, and Bob was instrumental in discovering and then also being in the forefront of pushing that, saving that location and also restoring it. Tonight, however, the focus is on Elvis. Many of you will remember several years ago, Bob wanted us to speak about Elvis's first foray in Florida in the late 50s. That visit, which included performances in our own folk theater downtown, launched a musical and movie career that Bob wrote about in Elvis Ignited. Elvis Ignited, The Rise of an Icon in Florida. That's, of course, the book that I have here. It's a wonderful book. And if you don't have a copy, you want to make sure you get one today. But tonight, he'll offer fresh new insights on the pivotal role that Florida played in the King of Rock and Roll's rise as both a music icon and also film star until his life was tragically cut short in 1977. Bob is the author again of 5 books on Florida history and culture, including Elvis Ignited, Calling Me Home, which is a book about Graham Parsons and the roots of country rock. And also his last visit here, he spoke about his book, Good Day Sunshine State, How the Beatles Rocked Florida in 1964 and 5. So he's a 6-time Emmy-winning reporter, retired reporter, and 2-time recipient of the Edward R. Murrow Award. He's also appeared on national programs such as Dateline NBC, The Today Show, CBS This Morning, and he's appeared as a guest on NPR, CNN, MSNBC, NBC, and C-SPAN. He lives in Longwood, Florida, which means he's familiar with I-4, that's for sure, coming here. And he's the married father of 2 college-age children. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Bob Kealing.
Thank you all so much. Can you hear me okay? My wife would be like, put a microphone in his hand. He already talks loud enough. It's so nice to be here tonight. And before you go too far, Dr. Ben, I want to thank you very much, along with your staff, the folks who sponsored this appearance tonight. There just aren't many opportunities like this for historians like me to be able to come and present like this. So I would like you all to very warmly give him a round of applause. So let's talk about some Elvis in Florida. You know, my wife, who I mentioned, is a Memphis girl, and her dad worked at the Cadillac dealership where Elvis would come in at night like a vampire. As a dolphin heroes and big heroes, Cadillacs and big heroes. And I was just like a member of the family to her. And she can remember going up the drive at Graceland as a kid to look at the Christmas decorations because they were able to do that at that time. And so I already had a lot of interest in Presley and his music and his history. And then the more I got into it, the more I realized that Elvis didn't just appear here in concert. There are many historic and important connections in Florida that helped propel his career into the stratosphere. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight as well. And I also want to talk about the many times he appeared in Lakeland and show you some fun footage from 50 years ago. We heard something about burning love earlier, didn't we? Now we're going to see and hear some of that from the king himself. And I thought what I would do is start on this slide. And you look at the first one right here, next to my book. This is one of the first advertisements of Elvis coming to Florida in May of 1955. And we have Kealing to play tonight. It's called Find Elvis in the Ad. Can you guys see it? Do you see it? Way down here below Mother Maybelle and the Carter sisters and Slim Whitman, right next to Oni Wheeler, there's Elvis with Bill and Scotty. DJ Montana hasn't been joining yet. And this is the Southeastern Pavilion, which is in Ocala. And I had the good fortune to interview the gentleman who promoted that show. And we're going to talk a little bit about him in just a bit. But let's talk about Elvis and Lincoln, shall we? There he is, at the Dutch Inn at I-4 and the 98 exit. And I got to tell you tonight because I got there a little bit early, and I was actually able to have a smooth drive down I-4 from Atlanta, which is a miracle in and of itself. But I stopped in to the place where he stayed. The Dutch Inn is now the Howard Johnson, and there's the room, 257, around the back at that Howard Johnson. If you want to see how Elvis was touring back then, even though he's been the king of rock and roll for 20 years, he's kind of staying in this so-so hotel up on the second floor. You're also going to hear from a fan who made the way to that hotel room, and we've got a funny piece of video about a souvenir she walked away with. Now, in 75, Elvis was still just a very captivating performer. And what I thought I would do is give you a sense of what it was like for the folks who were lucky enough to see him at the auditorium here in Lakeland. So let's roll that again. April 27th, 1975. And it's fun to go back and relive some of that kind of kitsch. You know, some people see that as sort of a schmaltzy period in Elvis's career. But frankly, the footage I've seen of the Lakeland performances, he is still very energetic and very dynamic. And for the 8,200 people who saw him at the Civic Center, they got to see quite a show. All in all, from three different occasions, August 6, 1956, we talked about 1975 and 1976, Elvis appeared in Lakeland 3 times and played a total of 8 shows. His manager, Colonel Parker, often had him doing 2 and 3 shows a day, sometimes even 4. And this one at the Polk Theater is especially important. And you notice where he LPR wrapped the wall in his dressing room, that discoloration is actually going to kind of leak. So they decided they needed to put that autograph under plastic. But if you go there today, you can still see it. And as a historic preservationist, I cannot tell you how glad I am that the Polk Theater still stands with all of its history and importance and what has turned into condos. So let's go back a little bit, shall we? 1956. And Elvis has just come from Tampa Bay, Mexico. And he's on his way to the Polk Theater. And he's in his convertible pink Lincoln Continental. And he pulls behind the Polk Theater. And he just goes breezing right by this young woman, Elvis Johnson. This guy has a big funky camera right there, and got sets, and it's hot. And he just whizzes on by. And to her credit, Elvis stomps right in behind him and says, "Excuse me, I'm Elvis Johnson of the Lakeland Ledger, and I've been doing stories on you all week in my newspaper. Elvis did 7 shows at the Olympia Theater in Miami. Incredible shows. Future Governor-to-be Bob Grant was there with his 19-year-old girlfriend. And I interviewed him too. And Herb Brown, he actually goes, this guy's saying is stupid. In fact, if I were a parent and my daughter was filled with this Presley mania, I'd slap it right off your face. Can you imagine someone writing that in Miami Herald? So, this criticism gets to Elvis. Remember, he's just turned 21 years old about 6 months before this interview, this recording was made. So this is Elvis at the Cold Theater, acquitting himself, his music, and his fans.
Those kids that come here and pay their money to see this show, come and have a good time. What's his name here? Probably mine is what's going on in town. That Herb Brown, what is that? I mean, I'm not running Mr. Ralph now. I just don't see that he should call those people idiots. Because they're somebody's kid. They're somebody's decent kid, probably, raised in a decent home. And he didn't have any right to call those kids idiots. If they wanna pay their money, come out and jump around and scream and yell, it's their business. They'll do it someday and grow out of it. I wasn't gonna run out of the corner and some old man that's so old he can't get around, sit around and call them an idiot. Because they're just human beings like he is.
The 21-year-old king, not bad. So that was his response to some of the growing criticism when they talked about his music and his gyration games. There's a reason why I call Florida Elvis's breakout state. Take a look here. In the 15 months between May of 55 and August of 56, where he toured Florida multiple times, he played 59 live shows in Florida. More Florida shows in 56 than any other state. Many states, Texas, Tennessee, more than those combined. So Florida really shot Elvis up into the stratosphere beginning when he was nobody. And what I thought I would do, if we all don't mind, is I'd like to do just a short reading from the book, talking about young Elvis's motivations. Sometimes great artists emerge from the most unlikely of circumstances. Presley once said, ambition is a dream with a V8 engine. That engine stoked his desire to escape the life he'd known in the projects of Memphis, often doing without. Not getting much notice from the girls. Imagine that. Getting teased for daring to dress in original ways was different. Ambition pushed Presley to pursue his dreams because, truth be told, there was no plan B. His natural talent and ambition, like a souped-up hot rod, burning deep in his soul, were his only ticket out of poverty. So it gives you a sense of why he worked so hard, why he played so many Florida shows. He didn't want to go back to being a truck driver for Crown after making $25 a week. And again, there's the Lakeland notice right in the middle. 3 shows, 3:30, 7 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. And you know who was having him do those, right? You know who was trying to squeeze every dollar out of every stop, right? You know who it was. Colonel Tom Parker. We're going to talk about him. I would just say, if he was a colonel, then we're all colonels. In fact, I like to be called general. But oh, let me show you this too. This program here Well, this is the gentleman who booked him in to the Southeast Pavilion. And this is he and I talking at that particular venue years ago. Jim Kerr, who was the general manager of WMOP Radio Ocala in May of 1955. And he goes, I get this phone call, and this guy on the other end is just raving about, this is my boy, it's Elvis, and I want you to have him on the show. He's not going to hurt a thing if you let him be the headliner. And he goes on and on and on. And Jim Kirk said, that was my introduction to John Parker. And he told me, he goes, you know that John Parker was one unique individual. I had often thought that when we were having trouble with the Russians, we should have sent him over there. Jim Kirk at the Southeastern Pavilion. And in the book, you'll read his visceral memory of Elvis actually hosting the show, which he did. Because by then, at the end of week one in Florida in 1955, the other artists were playing a bigger army going, listen, I'm not going around this kid. He's got everybody going crazy. He said, yeah, you know what? And he said, go right ahead. Knock him dead. And he said it was just amazing. Already, the girls were just insight on the curve. And he said, oh yeah, he planned an extra show at night and not even tell us. And not even pay us. And then Charlie's brother Ira, who was known to have a drink or two, finally confronted him about it. Parker's story from Florida is Florida. If you don't know about his military service, his desertion, his being thrown in jail, solitary confinement, coming out, and being diagnosed as psychotic, he made it very well. He got out of prison, found his way back to Florida, took a job as the head dog catcher for the Hillsborough County Humane Society in Tampa. That's where he started booking shows. That's where he started booking the former History Armory. The first show he ever booked, Roy County in April. And every time Elvis toured Florida, Parker always made sure that he played the History Armory. Here's another great story I told about. One of this was Dr. Dennis, who helped me with this stuff, got me in touch with Governor Graham's daughter, Gwen. And one day I was working, and my phone rings, and it's a 305 area code, and I almost didn't pick it up. Hi, this is Bob. Mr. Kealing? I guess. Bob Graham, tell me about Elvis. And I thought, God, I'm supposed to be telling me. And I asked him about the experience of seeing Elvis live in an extended period in August of '56. And I said, Governor, it's an honor to speak with you. Do you think Elvis's performances were obscene? And if you remember Bob Graham, he had this very studied way of speaking. And he said, no, I would not say his performances were obscene, but I would say that they were provocative. Governor Graham, and that is one of the classic early Elvis photos that was taken at the Olympic Theater in Miami. That's the other amazing thing. Many of the iconic pictures of early Elvis was taken in Florida. Another great source in my book was Annie Helm, who was Elvis's co-star in the Follow That Dream. It's funny looking at that Turtle Creek Bridge now. If you go out there, it's through the sticker 42, which is all the way across. And you would never ever know that they had taken out all of this foliage and put that fake beach in there. I mean, now it's so overgrown, maybe you miss it. But this is where they filmed Follow That Dream on location. And what I wanted to ask Ms. Hill was, by the time 61 comes along, and they're filming the movie, some of said Presley was already starting to go down the rabbit hole with the prescription pills. And it was attributed largely to him having to do night maneuvers when he was in the military, and he needed them to stay up. And she said, there were times, he'd be up late at night, and then he would have a shoot, have to do a scene. And yet, you might, she said, her mom, she was giving diet pills to the shoot. And she said, we might pop one or two of them, but it's not like he was like any one of us. It just helped perk us up a little. So, but she really provided a wonderful perspective into Elvis as a great person. He was 26 years old in this film, and I was thrilled when she sent me those nice signed pictures. How many of you think maybe the 68 comeback special was the best thing Elvis ever did on TV? Show of hands. Yeah, fantastic. I was highly honored to interview the producer of that TV special, Steve did. We talked for hours. We talked about Tom Parker. He said, you know, when Parker would get his way, he would scare me. And I think he was trying to hypnotize him. He called me Bindle. Bindle. Steve Bender was the only one who would stand up to him. And when Parker wanted to put in these corny, Andy Williams type scenes with Elvis in a sweater, Bender shot there. And Parker would bring both of them into his production office and just dress them down about how Spectre was not doing how he would want it. At one point, Bender said, Elvis, elbow him. And he goes into his That's him. So he's getting Elvis to stand up to Parker. And as a result, well, that fantastic piece of television history. In fact, I think the live version of that song, If I Can Dream, is Elvis's best moment on television by far. And Bender told me the wonderful story of how the song came to be. Martin Luther King had just been assassinated. Then Bobby Kennedy and he and Elvis are sitting watching the coverage, and Elvis, like the rest of the nation, is highly distraught. And he's definitely going to make some kind of mistake. And in less than 48 hours, his songwriters came up with If I Can Dream. And I'm not going to sing it because you guys will get up and walk out the doors. But I will say that it is a song of hope and despair, and that's what 68 was for people in America. And Bender described watching Elvis record that song with all the lights off. He was laying down almost in the fetal position. That's how he recorded that song. That's how much it meant to him. And that's translated in that final scene of the film Spectre. So if you haven't seen it in a while, I saw it on, I believe it's on Amazon. Might be Netflix, but one of those. Watch it again for the first time if you haven't recently. And another incredibly important female journalist from the Tampa Bay Times. Now, I would say Elvis had a very unique way of reporting the media, especially female media members. But again, she's another who took him seriously. I mean, while the men were writing, I wonder if that male hoochie coochie dancer is going to have one so in his name, I kid you not. She's talking about the young man while she's interviewing him is sweeping up the dressing room. He tells me about how when he's out performing, he gets lamps for his mom and just sends them back for her. Now Mrs. Preston's got lamps all over the house. It's just little details like that to humanize him. Because the women who covered Elvis took him seriously. And of course, this picture from July 31st, 1955, is the iconic picture of young Elvis, taken by Red Robinson at the History Armory in Tampa, July 31st, 1955. And Elvis was opening for a young comedian by the name of Andy Griffith. Now, do you remember Andy Griffith's football monologue? You guys remember that? So what it was football, the rolling fiddles kicking that little puppy all around, and as much as you're kicking it, never busting it. And it was fun to hear Andy Griffith's quotes about Elvis. There's the boy, he fractures those girls all to pieces. And who would have thought, 5-6 years later, Andy goes on to Sharon Taylor. But this tour was Elvis opening for Andy. And of course, that is the iconic image cropped on Elvis's very first record. Now, let's talk a little history, Elvis history. You saw the wonderful environs that Elvis was staying at the old Dutch Inn in 257. 20 years as a king of rock and roll, you're staying in a kind of sketchy hotel on the outskirts of town. And Elvis decided he wanted a home base in Florida. And he was going after this house in St. Cloud. And he's going to buy it. This would have been during 75, 76. The house was built in 72. And I talked to Larry Reedowitz, the reporter for the Atlanta Sentinel. And he said, yeah, when I talked to the developer, he said, Elvis's people were interested in it. But what happened? They wanted to take an 8-acre piece of open space behind the house and build a big theater behind it. And apparently the code enforcement people mixed it. Elvis didn't move to St. Cloud. Can you imagine being that code enforcement guy? Yeah, I think that person guy and the wife, yeah, you can see the connection, right? But yeah, this was going to be his home base for touring in Florida. And of course, Elvis's first million seller. This was the genesis of it. Tommy Durden tells the story of being a traveling musician and reading. He's now stopped in Gainesville, and he reads the Miami Herald about a guy who apparently ended his life. And there was no, he jumped out of the window. There was no ID, but it was scrap of paper in his pocket that said, on the street. Because that might be the basis for a song. And he said, it's Booker T. Jackson, who was promoting Elvis's early Florida tours, and had even told him, I'm going to write your first million seller. Guess what happened? So, as legend has it, in the fall of 1955, those two sat down in her living room on Delaware Avenue, 3239, just west of downtown Jacksonville. And that house is still there today. And they had a DJ friend who's also a performer, Glenn Reeves, come over and sing a demo of that song. You'll hear that in a minute. But one of the things I'm very proud of is once the owner found out the history of his house by reading that book, he actually put this historic plaque above the house himself. And that's pretty cool. Now, I mentioned the demo. Glenn Reeves really didn't think much of the song. In fact, Manny Tommy says, listen, if you're doing a demo, we're going to give you a third of the songwriting credit. And he said, I don't want any credit for that more mess. And he sings the song almost jokingly, but listen to how close it actually is to the real version.
I found a place to dwell. Been down at the end of Lonely Street. I can't go there. So lonely, I could die. Well, it's always crowded. It's just fine to look for
Now, granted, the vocals were a little overwrought, but it was representative enough of the song that when they took, the demo version to Elvis' songwriters convention up in Tennessee, Elvis was like, Don and May, I'll do it. And the timing was perfect because Tom Parker had just negotiated a release of Elvis' contract from Stan Phillips' son over to RCA. When Presley recorded that song the very first in that session in early 1956, and within a couple of months, he was number one poet in the country. So now, before I open it up to any comments or questions, I want to talk about a very enterprising fan here in Elizabeth. She found out that Elvis was staying at that old Dutch Inn. Not only did she hide out in the stairway to get his autograph and to meet him, oh, it gets better. She goes back up there the next day after Elvis left. She wants to swing at Neil for the sheets off his bed. But there's an issue. There are 2 beds instead of hotel room 257. So she goes, okay, I think I'll know how to solve that. So here she is. This is Kathy Ireland, the souvenir hunter who scored. This is 1975. If you guys want to get that. Did you hear that? She said, if both beds are messed up, we never would have known. But because there was only one bed messed up, I went ahead and gave her $20 for the sheets. And I could smell Elvis's cologne. And she's kept them in a bag ever since. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you all so much for your kind attention. And if you have any comments or questions, I think we might have time for a couple of those. I got a few folks outside too if you'd like to get a signed one.
Thank you, Bob.
Absolutely. Mike Dillon, right there.
So let me ask you a question.
There's a lot of people when I do this who have better stories in mind, by the way. I was Graham Parsons' driver's ed teacher. Oh, why don't you come on? It's amazing. Anybody have a question or a comment about Elvis in Florida? Elvis? Any of you seen him back 75? Oh, we're going down here. Down here. Wonderful. Puppy's making you raise your hand. Was there anything about those shows that surprised you, inspired you? When people think about that Elvis, he would just turn 40 in 75. Do you ever bristle when people talk about making typical fat Elvis and all that? Let's talk about that video. He was still very much alive. What did you think about that? What did you think about his appearance? Did you have a question or comment?
I actually had a question.
May asked me.
Her son
Point asked.
was Hoy. He was about 17 at that time. Was he influenced at all by Elvis, or did you ever get any feedback on that? I was just curious.
Absolutely. In case you didn't hear the question, May Axton's son, Hoyt Axton, who went on to be the country singer and the actor, there was another 17 whose songs Elvis recorded. May's, of course, was her Hoyt Axton, never been the same. So yeah, huge influence. Thanks for the question.
I think there's actually some people in this room. I know there's some people in this room that were there that night in 1956.
56? Oh, now I really want to hear.
One of them is right here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I was a young boy, and my older sister, who was 10 years older than I, took me to the Gulf Theater to see this entertainment running of Elvis Presley, and I was shocked. I was just overcame this. My sister was with her girlfriend and stuff, and she was like 20 or 18, and I was like about 9, and it was amazing. The people just were going crazy in the Coke Theater, and I was in awe. Well, I go to the Coke Theater now, I look at it and say, that is who he was. He was right there.
Isn't that amazing? This story about a group of boys, probably a little older than you, who weren't real thrilled about their girlfriends going on Elvis. And there was some police concern that they might do something to disrupt the show. The only thing they did do was lob a tomato from the upper deck that only got as far as one of the police on the shoulder. Thanks for your story. Appreciate it. 75, 76, 56. What do you think? No. If she told you the stories, you want to share?
Twice.
So twice? 2 of the 3 shows. It's really amazing. In the book, I talk a lot about his relationship with his girlfriend at the time, Jean Malik. And there was a lot going on during that particular point. And she really struggled, as you can imagine, with her boyfriend being up there just with this fabulous love and admiration. And including her story really helped humanize Elvis's whole situation too. Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I have a question about the related to the interview that you shared at the beginning of the lecture. Do you believe Elvis is ever been influenced specifically for his performance or the controversy that is?
You know, I think adults were threatened by Elvis. And I may actually have a short passage, if you just give me a second, that addresses that very issue. Let's see if I can find it. Basically, the crux of it is that, remember, in the 50s, you're supposed to listen to your parents, right? And then all of a sudden, this unbelievably charismatic figure comes on the scene, and all of a sudden, he is doing music that is specifically written for teenagers. And I think a lot of adults, I'm just going to hold off on that for now, that's the crux of the passage. Is he threatening? I think he was threatening. From a cultural standpoint, and he was singing what some people refer to as race music. Hound Dog, Big Mama Thornton. You know, artists like Elvis borrowed a lot from African American culture. And in a very real way, it broke the color line. And I think that was an integrating factor in 1950s America. So I think that's his cultural impact from the 50s and into the early 60s was so important because he blurred the color line. And he and B.B. King were close friends in Memphis. And, you know, he grew up poor. He grew up like a lot of the African American musicians, and he was on Beale Street. So I think Elvis's music was an integrating factor, which started the foment in the late 50s and went well over in the 60s. That would be my answer to that. Yes?
Hi. Is there a moment in your research that still to this day that lingers with you or that just stuck with you when you're doing all your research for this stuff?
Yeah, many of them. mean, the thing, I'm sitting here talking to, one of the greatest political figures ever come out for about Graham, and he's telling me a story about dating his wife when he was a freshman at the U.S. And Steve Bender, too. And I'll share a story. I think maybe Steve Bender, now I talked to him on the phone, he's in Los Angeles. But one of the things he talked about, he did the Canyon show. He was the current producer of the scene. And Elvis, by 68, kind of has been. And Elvis wanted to change that. So then there was approached about producing this comeback session. And he said, okay, but I have some conditions. I want to sit in my office with Elvis and talk to him. I don't want his entourage. I don't want the colonel who's not a colonel, it's not Parker. I want to talk to him myself. And that's what we did. And that was, he said, I want you to be honest with me. Where do you think my career is right now? And then there didn't stick a beat. Because I think it's in the toilet. Because he made all those B movies all through the 60s. And people have forgotten who he was, basically. And Bender went on and said, not only do I think it's in the toilet, I think if you and I walked outside right now and stood on Sunset Boulevard and waved at cars, no one would recognize you. And at one point in the production, Elvis goes to Bender, okay, come on, let's go. They went out there and were waiting, and according to Bender, so I think it was somebody, he was talking to someone who had that candid conversation with Elvis, and you see how that is a milepost in his career where he started coming back to be relevant again. And how all the original band members being back on stage with him, doing that with an unplugged set, which became so popular down the line. And Scotty said, we were so encouraged to finally be back with Elvis, playing songs from the old days. And you remember Elvis is back, and he just like, I mean, and he just killed that performance. And he said, we're finally going to tour Europe. We're going to get that together. We're going to do the stuff that we enjoy doing. And Scotty was over the moon. And then you know what happened? He got shut out. It never happened. And after the comeback session, even though it had critical ratings, then it was completely shut off by Parker. Parker shut it all down. And you know what? You want to know why the Colonel would not let Elvis tour outside of North America? He was a legal alien. And he was afraid he would be discovered. Yeah, it is amazing when you read the book how much of his past he buried. And Gladys known, she never would have let him manage herself. So I guess it could be deceived in the interview. To hear the behind the scenes of someone candidly say, no, I'm sorry, your career is in hell right now. And Elvis flying in and saying, I'm in your hands, what do you want me to do? That's why the section is good. Yes.
Okay, so I remember you referring to Elvis as the man doing the hoochie. So what do you think was the turning point in his career where, as a society, we started viewing him as the king?
See the last part one more time, sir?
What do you think is the turning point where we started viewing him as the king?
Great question. Well, I think certainly in 1956, when his Ed Sullivan appearances, the controversy, kids love controversy. Do you remember what happened to him in Jacksonville at the Florida Theater? There was a judge sitting in the back with an arrest warrant. And he said, if I see any of his obscene moves, any of his obscene gestures, I personally will go arrest him and I will walk into the jail, which conveniently is right across the alley. And so you know what Elvis did? You remember where he would only move his pinky? That is it. He said, oh, I can't do anything else. I think it was a controversy. I think it was the fact that finally he was someone singing to young people. It was their music. And I think he really launched youth culture in America. Or he was very much, he ignited the youth culture. And then along came the Beatles. You know how that happened. That answer your question? Okay. Still not on the 56?
Well, I think we have enough time for one more here. Okay.
I'm listening to you right now with that kid, but she's not talking. He was traveling in a fleet of Lincoln Continentals at that time when he came to the Post Theater. And he left them at Lincoln Mercury, or part of that fleet, to get work done. And he came back on a Sunday to pick up their cars at Lincoln Mercury where they wouldn't be disturbed. And the child of the 50s, he got your dad's car on Sunday afternoon, and you rode around with him. Well, a friend rode by, named Malcolm, and she showed me her arm. She said, Elvis just signed my arm. I said, sure, she did. And he said, no, he's at Lincoln Mercury. Well, we couldn't stomp on the ass fast enough to get to Lincoln Mercury. But just as we got there, he pulled out. So I was right behind him. But he got to the railroad tracks and the train came and he was stuck with our car behind him. But we were not so gracious to get out and look at the car. We honked at the time. But then we got out into the hospital, it was double lane, and I could pull up on the left-hand side. And he turned around and gave us the biggest wing. And of course, our hands were off the steering when we swung, and off he went and never saw it again.
Ladies and gentlemen, ladies, cornered the king. Love that. Love that.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's been a great night. For those of you who don't have a copy of the Elvis book or any of Bob's great books, Grant Parsons' book, the Beatles book, they're available outside, and I'm sure Bob would love to sign a copy for you. We will be back, not in this room, but across the way on November 6th for Joy Pastor. So join us for that.
Thank you all very much. Good night.